everyone, Heero here, and today we're gonna look at Mortenax Blade, the guy from Fortnite's new form that combines insane debuffs with high personal damage to enable massive team damage. I'll be discussing his kit, builds, lightcones, and possible teams. Just as a quick disclaimer though, the footage and information shown is from the creator experience server, so things could still change when his banner drops. Now let's first start with his regular basic, which deals damage and taunts the enemy, which is extremely useful for his energy generation and for keeping your team alive when combined with his other survival-based mechanics. But moving on to his ult, aside from looking super cool, it also does a lot of things. First of which is it inflicts the Balefire Bind debuff on all enemies, which is a 30% defense shred on top of a 50% damage vulnerability debuff, which is insane in terms of his damage amping utility, and it's what makes him a very versatile unit that can be used in most teams. Now it's also worth noting that this debuff only lasts for 2 turns, but thanks to his talent, it allows any party member to inflict the debuff whenever they attack as long as his zone is up, which not only ensures its uptime, but it's also insane for batterying Acheron, especially when paired with high attack frequency units like Freebie. But just note, his regular ult also consumes 20% of his HP to activate his special zone that allows Blade to enter the Infinite Fury state for as long as his zone is active. After which, a countdown appears in the action bar with a fixed 70 speed. And when you reach its turn, Blade's zone is dispelled and his Infinite Fury state ends. But if Blade happens to die while his Infinite Fury state is active, instead of dying, Blade exits the state and dispels the zone while recovering 50% of his HP. And this can occur repeatedly, so Blade is basically immortal as long as he only dies in his enhanced state. Now his zone and his Infinite Fury state also does a lot of things. First of which is that it gives him a 20% crit rate and a 60% crit damage buff as long as he's in the Infinite Fury state, which of course makes him easier to build. Second, thanks to his A6 passive, his zone also gives a party-wide 50% damage buff, but if there are other Nihility units aside from Blade, his zone also gives a party-wide 75% ult damage buff, but if not, he gives an additional 75 buff to himself instead. But moving on, the final thing his zone and enhanced state does is it gives him several new enhanced abilities. The first of which is it gives him a new ult that does a lot of HP scaling damage while also looking pretty damn badass. Second, he gets an enhanced basic, which just deals more damage while still being able to taunt enemies. Again, pretty useful for team survivability and energy generation. And finally, his zone also unlocks his skill, which is a bounce AoE that deals 72% of his HP as damage to all enemies while dealing 4 additional hits targeting random enemies, with each hit dealing 24% of his HP as damage. Now the skill does not consume SP because instead it consumes 10% of his HP instead, but if he doesn't have enough, it leaves him at 1 HP instead. And you cannot use his skill if he only has 1 HP or if he is not at the Infinite Fury state. However, on that note, we can go back to his talent because aside from its insane debuff frequency rate, it also has another effect. Whenever any ally attacks an enemy, it grants Blade 1 charge point. And when Blade reaches 9 charge points and has more than 1 HP, he consumes said charge points to regen 25 energy while automatically proccing his skill once. And this bonus skill proc counts as a follow-up, so it does benefit from follow-up buffs like those from Ashvale or Topaz. Now his A2 passive also helps with his charge point generation and debuff application rate, since it inflicts Balefire Bind on any enemy that hits him while giving him 1 charge point. But in order to fully utilize this effect, this passive also increases the chance of him being attacked, while also reducing the damage he takes and increasing the healing he receives by 50%. However, just note, his zone needs to be active for this passive to take effect. But moving on, his A2 passive allows him to accumulate up to 80 overflow energy in a form of a buff, which he consumes after using an ult to give him the same amount of energy back. Aside from this, after the battle starts or after his zone expires, if his energy is below 75%, he regens energy until he's at 75%, which of course makes it easier to refresh his enhanced state and zone or to get his ult by the first turn. And finally, whenever he reaches max energy, it dispels all debuffs on him, which of course means he can always ult with little to no issues. As for his technique, aside from looking really cool, he also attacks all enemies within a certain range, but in combat, it inflicts the taunt state on all enemies for 1 turn and decreases the damage he takes by 90% for 2 turns, which of course is neat since it makes getting turn 1 ults easier. But finally, for talent prio, level up his ult first, then his skill, then his talents, and finally his basics. Make sure to level everything up since he uses all of it depending on the team he's in. But with this kid out of the way, let's talk about his Eidolons. His E1 decreases the all-type res of all enemies by 20% as long as his zone is active, which of course makes his already insane damage amping utility even better. Aside from this, the Countdown of Infinite Fury has its action delayed by 15% after he procs the extra skill from his talent, which of course is neat for a bit more uptime for his zone. While his E2 decreases the limit of Blade's charge points to 7, allowing him to proc his talent's bonus skill and energy easier. Aside from this, it makes it so that any damaging ult used by the party is now considered as a follow-up attack. So with an E2 Blade, pretty much any ult can now get affected by the follow-up buffs like those from the Duke set or Ash Veil's crit damage buff. But his E2 also gives a permanent 72% follow-up damage buff that any damaging ult can now take advantage of. This is an extremely insane Eidolon when considering that ults are now follow-ups, since this buff is on top of the 75% ult damage buff from his passive, resulting in a 150% damage buff, which units like Acheron and Ash Veil, to name a few, greatly benefit from. As for his E4, it allows his zone to give an additional 50% party-wide damage buff for a total of 100%. Cause why not improve his already insane damage amping utility even more? And finally, his E6, it gives him 1 charge point after he takes damage or consumes HP. Just note, this is on top of the points he gets after getting hit, and this can only trigger once until the end of any target's turn. Aside from this, it also increases the damage multiplier of his ult to 150% of the original amount, going from 350% all the way to 525%. But with his Eidolons out of the way, let's talk about his possible light cones. Blade's really cool looking signature gives him 30% HP just by equipping it. Aside from this, it also gives him 20 energy at the start of his turn, but sadly this can only take effect 1 time per wave. His signature also allows his skill to inflict the purgatory state on its target, which makes them take 30% more crit damage from any party member, and 60% more crit damage from Blade himself, which of course is neat for more damage. Now overall, it's a pretty great light cone that gives him a decent quality of life upgrade, with the energy helping him get his ult at the start of combat and waves easier, and this is all on top of the decent amp from the crit damage it provides. However, since he is a Nihility unit, he has a ton of great offensive and supportive options, so his signature is definitely not a must-pull. And instead, I would suggest going for his Eidolons if you plan to vertically invest on him. But speaking of options, for his personal damage, Boundless Choreo for its great crit rate and crit damage buff to make him easier to build, Goodnight Sleepwell's really big 72% damage buff, and finally, Acheron's signature for its big crit damage and damage buffs are all pretty great options for improving his damage output. But moving on to supportive options, he has quite a lot, and these are usually his preferred options. First of which is Resolution and Cypher's signature for a massive defense shred to improve his damage amp even further, with Cypher's signature also making it easier to reach speed thresholds. The BP Cone Holiday provides both a personal damage buff as well as a damage vulnerability debuff that the whole team can benefit from. So it's a good mix of improving both his personal damage and supportive utility, but its downside is that it's paid and it takes a while to get copies of. Now just note, all 3 of these light cones all require some effect hit rate investment to guarantee their debuffs land, so take note of their effect hit rate requirements on screen. And finally, Tutorial is also great. Thanks to his defense shred and decent attack frequency, he is able to take advantage of the energy it gives pretty often, which of course allows for more potential or back-to-back ults, especially with an ER rope, and overall, it just makes his energy rotation pretty comfy. It's also great for giving him more attacks to help battery units like Acheron and Ashvale. However, the trade-off with this Lightcone is that it does not give damage boosting buffs to your party in favor of more utility and more ults. But with his Lightcones out of the way, let's look at possible relics. His best set would be the new Master Smith set for its HP and crit damage dealt buff to improve his personal damage, alongside a party-wide 15% damage buff to improve his damage amp utility. It's a set that was made for him, so if you want a good general use set for both his utility and personal damage that can work in any of his teams, I highly recommend just farming this one. But another possible good set is Eagle. But how good it is heavily depends on the team you're running. It's great when combined with an ER rope and the tutorial LC, which is an amazing setup for battering units that benefit from lots of team actions like Acheron, Ashvale, and Fei Xiao. However, the trade-off for this utility is that Blade deals less damage, it gives less buffs, and you'll still have to farm for a Master Smith set anyway if you want to use him in teams that don't really benefit from Eagle. But moving on to planar sets, his best one for personal damage is Demesne for its HP and crit damage buff. Now technically, Duran and Salcedo can also work if they have better substats, and Duran in particular is actually pretty good if you have his E2. But for pre-E2 Blade, Demesne is better for buffing his overall damage due to its HP buff being less diluted than damage percent or crit damage bonuses, so I suggest just farming that one. But for supportive planars, his best options are Von Whack for general use, or Lashaka if you want them to also give your DPS an attack buff. And as usual, these are great for improving his utility and helping him spam more ults to help battery units like Acheron, Ashvale, or Fei Xiao, especially when used in conjunction with the Eagle set and other energy sources. And just note, Von Whack also helps him get his ult and zone up earlier in combat by helping him act first. But with his possible relics out of the way, let's talk about stats. Now he has a great base HP of 1358 and a great base speed of 107, with his traces giving him a 22% fire damage buff, 10% HP, and 12% crit rate. And in total, he can get 37% crit rate and 110% crit damage from his kit alone, so make sure to consider all of that when building. For main stats, for the chest, crit rate is preferred to make it way easier to get to 100% crit rate in battle for consistent damage. Now, crit damage can work too if you're really lucky with crit rate substat rolls, but I highly suggest just going crit rate to make him easier to build. For the boots, speed is the best because it's very important for him to get more actions in order to generate energy and charge points to get more ults and skills. So getting lots of turns is pretty important not only for his personal damage, but also for batterying units like Acheron, Fei Xiao, and Ashvale. Now you can use HP boots, but this is only in extremely niche scenarios like if you're running him as a hyper carry with a 160 speed sparkle. But outside of cases like that, I recommend just using speed boots. Now for the orb, HP percent is preferred since Blade already gets way too much damage buffs. But a fire orb can also work if it has significantly better substats. As for the rope, HP is good for higher per instance damage, but ER is heavily preferred in a lot of scenarios. It of course helps get more ults, which for the nth time is great for batterying units like Acheron, especially when running Eagle, an ER planar, and the tutorial LC. Plus, it helps get first turn ults easier if you don't have his signature. But for stat goals, for HP, 5000 for Demesne is a good minimum, but it is recommended to get more. As for crit rate, since his Infinite Fury state gives him 20% crit rate, aim for 80% to get 100% crit rate in battle. While for crit damage, since his enhanced state already gives him 60%, aim for a minimum of 120% for great damage. But try to get more if you can once you're satisfied with his other stat goals. And finally for speed, for general use, 134 speed as usual is the recommended goal, but you can go higher if you want more actions to help improve his battery potential. But for hyper carry Blade setups, you can go for the usual base speed if you're running him with Sparkle, or 135 speed for a -1 speed with Sunday. And just note, he might need some effect hit rate as well depending on the Lightcone you're using, so make sure to take note of all the info on screen to see how much EHR is needed per LC.
But with this stat breakdown out of the way, let's talk about possible teammates.
Blade as a unit is a generic but powerful damage amper that is capable of dealing high personal damage, meaning a majority of units benefit from his buffs or debuffs, so he is a very versatile unit and can slot in a majority of teams in the game. Plus, he's really great for keeping the team alive, especially in sustainless teams, since his self-revive, taunt, and damage reduction mechanics make him extremely hard to kill, allowing him to act as a pseudo-sustain. And this is especially the case when he's paired with someone like Welt. And by the way, Blade together with Welt or Ashvale can make up a very strong wheelchair combo that can support a lot of teams. Now let's go over his best teams, starting with Ashvale teams, with Blade now being his best in slot partner, especially with them pretty much just buffing each other's damage massively. Plus, they also battery each other extremely well, especially when paired with a frequent attacking support or sustain like Tribi or Hyacinth. And if you want, you can also run sustainless for this team. Now, if you don't have Tribi, you can use your One Mei or other generic team-wide buffers, with frequent attacking ones like Cypher being preferred. Heck, even Topaz can work for her follow-up buffs. But when choosing a support, just note, it's very easy to overcap in defense reduction due to Blade and Ashvale collectively giving a 70% def shred. Now, like I said earlier, Blade and Ashvale make up a very strong wheelchair duo due to their team-wide buffs and high damage, with crit DPSs, especially follow-up ones, benefiting the most from the duo. The best example being a Fei Xiao comp, harkening back to the old triple follow-up teams, with the trio essentially batterying each other so much, they'll constantly spam their high-powered abilities like their ults and follow-ups. Now of course, it's not only Fei Xiao that benefits from this. Like I said, any crit DPS can take advantage of this duo's buffs as long as they don't require specific units for their mechanics. But on that note, another extremely notable DPS this duo can work with is Acheron, with both of them combined helping her spam so much ults thanks to Blade's zone and their high attack frequency. But speaking of Acheron, Blade is now her best fire nihility support. Sorry, Jiao Cho.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
Anyway, Acheron greatly benefits from his damage amping utility, especially his damage buffs, resulting in her being able to clear content super fast despite being a 2-year-old unit without a Nova Flare. However, more importantly, his zone enables the entire team to have a debuff application frequency comparable, if not better, than an E2 Silver Wolf, allowing Acheron to spam her ult extremely often, especially when paired with high attack frequency sustains, supports, or Ashvale. But of course, generic supports like Silver Wolf, Welt, and more can work too. Overall, Blade is just a colossal upgrade for her, and that's even without any of his Eidolons or signature. So just imagine how insane this duo will become if Acheron gets a Nova Flare. So in a sense, you can think of Blade as Acheron's Dahlia. But this time, however, Blade isn't just limited to Acheron teams, because he can also work in either Casteress or Evernight teams due to his damage amping utility, with him acting as a good alternative if you're missing one of them or Cyrene. Now, just to clarify, he isn't replacing any of them in the best Mono Remembrance team. He is just a very good alternative if you don't have one of them, or if you want to split Evernight and Casteress apart. Plus, as an added bonus, he has a bit more utility in the Casteress team thanks to his skill's HP drain, allowing him to help battery Casteress pretty effectively, which of course is pretty neat. But moving on, he's also pretty good for archer teams, with his damage amping utility like his defense shred being pretty rare in this comp, meaning his buffs are especially potent for enabling archers' damage. Plus, with one full archer skill spam, he provides over half of the charge points needed by Blade, allowing Blade to use his skill more often and get his ult faster. However, depending on the 4th slot unit, you might have to use Blade's basic more often, either to generate SP or help keep the team alive with his taunts. It's also worth to mention that since Archer was given out and is being given out for free next patch, he is a very great choice for beginner, free-to-play, low-cost, or budget Blade teams. He's also great for sustainless the Herta teams due to his extremely high attack frequency when paired with another high attack frequency support like Tribi or Cypher to battery Herta for more ult spam. Now he can work in the regular the Herta team, but Tribi is still way better for batterying Herta, but he is still a pretty good alternative, especially if you run Lingsha or Hyacinth as your healer. Blade can also work in a sustainless Ava team. Now sadly his damage buffs only slightly benefit Ava, but his universal amp is great for enabling her damage. Plus, his survivability mechanics makes sustainless Ava teams easier to play, making him a great upgrade to an E4 Welt in this team. And the neat thing is, each elation skill is counted as a separate ability, so you can get up to 3 charge points in one AHA instant. And thanks to that, Blade can actually use his ult and skill extremely often in this team. Well, until he reaches 1 HP anyway, but the enemy should be dead before then. You can also run him in the standard Ava team, just in case you don't have Yao Guang, or she's preoccupied in the Wolfie team, or your EMC is busy being the RMC. Now sadly, he cannot eliminate the issues of not having Yao Guang, but he can still help Ava clear content. But moving on, like I said, he also makes a great wheelchair duo with Welt, with the pair being especially great for sustainless teams due to their mechanics making surviving way easier. Plus, their damage amping utility also helps enable a ton of damage, especially for ult damage focused characters. A great example being Saber, who ends up dealing a ton of ult damage with this sustainless team. Now sadly, Blade isn't the dedicated support Saber has been waiting for, but he is still a great choice for any Saber team, sustainless or not. Now, here are other team examples that can run Bladey. Now sadly, I can't go over all of them one by one since there's simply too many teams he can fit in and this video is long enough already. And the thing is, since he's so versatile, this isn't even all of his possible team options. But like I said, he can pretty much work in most teams due to his universal damage amp. And finally, you can also run Bladey as a hyper carry with an action advancer like Sunday or Sparkle, but just note, this team prefers having a high attack frequency 4th or 3rd slot unit since this team relies way more on Blade's damage compared to any other team. Now this isn't really Blade's best team, the Acheron and Ashvale team still beats it by a long mile. However, it's still a decent team that can clear content or if you're just looking for something different to try. Now that's about it. Personally, I'm definitely gonna be pulling for Blade because he's insane, plus I'm a pretty big Blade fan. I mean, just look how cool his new form is. Wait, that's not the right image. But anyway, make sure to tell me what you think about him in the comments below, and don't forget to leave me with a like and a sub.